So at this time, comrades, we're going to continue on to the agenda and get into the third section of the plenary report and discussion. And Chairman O'Malley should tell us already up here, so I'll let him get into it.
Uhuru. I want to, first of all, just reiterate the significance of what has just happened in terms of the commitment that we make to building and supporting our own party, our own revolutionary process. During the beginning of this workshop, there was some discussion about the history of our party in terms of engaging in self-reliance, self-determination. I'll say something else about that during this discussion, but it is our history. And it's our history because we are a movement that's involved in winning our freedom for ourselves, self-reliance, self-determination. In order to have self-determination, we have to be self-reliant. That's one of the things that's distinguished us from certain organizations in our communities. For example, the NAACP likes to brag about the fact that it's the oldest organization and the largest organization in the African community. And it is pretty old. Decrepit. But it doesn't have a single institution dealing with economic development, not one. It doesn't do anything about economic development because it doesn't have to. Because theoretically, what it's committed to is integrating into the white society. So if that's what you see as freedom, is integrating into the colonial society, you have no obligations to struggle for self-reliance. And I just think that it's really important that we recognize, I mean, we've done everything from, the traditional fish fries and dinner sales to had a restaurant, right around the corner from here, Ujamaa Restaurant. We've created all kinds of institutions, recognizing also that our capacity to take care of ourselves is one of the things that allows us to maintain our independence as an organization. So it was only in the 1980s where the task that we had to build a revolution subsequent to the defeat of the Black Revolution, well, even during that period, we owned bookstores and record shops and newspapers that we created. The first black newspaper in the city of Gainesville, Florida, we established that as a party project, an economic project. And later on, the African People's Solidarity Committee, having been won to the concept of reparations and a strategic relationship to the revolution as opposed to charity, created certain kinds of institutions and have been custodians of various institutions of the party. That's really important for generating resources. And these are party-owned institutions. But now, as you'll see before this plenary is over, we're making a major leap in terms of really rebuilding institutions of economic self-reliance in the party, run by the party, and that's just going to be fundamental. It's going to take a whole different mindset also within our ranks in terms of how we move responsibly, as an organization. I want to salute and thank everybody for what we've just done in terms of the resources that we've contributed to the functioning of our party. I just thought it was magnificent. Now, we want to resume on page 33. At the first complete paragraph. We were born as a party of theory and practice, recognizing that practice is primary, and that all theory must meet the test of practice for its development and validation. We did not sit around contemplating the universe and creating various theories to explain the world. We were engaged in the struggle to change the world, and it has always been this struggle from which our theoretical work was born, informed, and tested. Our party has always recognized the centrality of practice. We have engaged in campaigns that help to educate our movement on how to advance struggle, and that help to enhance the capacity of our people to struggle. You know, sometimes we be engaged in some of these struggles, and people in the so-called movement, the African liberation movement, would challenge us, well, why are you organizing this demonstration to deal with this? This is not going to win your freedom. And clearly, the objective was not to win our freedom, because there's not a single demonstration we're going to have any place that's going to win our freedom. But what it did do and contribute to was enhancing the fighting capacity of our community. So when something came down, we would organize the masses around it, and the community is accustomed to fighting, to resisting. And that's a significant responsibility that we have as leaders of the African Revolution. We're constantly engaged. And then what you notice is you continue to do that, and you pick up a newspaper or you hear an article, or somebody comes down and say, hey, did you know about that demonstration that was happening over there? We had nothing to do with it. But not directly, but it's our influence, the fact that we've contributed to helping the people fight back, that people learn from those kinds of experiences. So that's important. It was the struggles in defense of our party and its leaders that is partially responsible for our surviving the terrorist counterinsurgent repression that defeated our movement. The struggles to keep me out of prison, the struggles to free Connie Tucker and Desi Woods, and to defend Couture Carey, one of the founding members of the party, were popular struggles that involved thousands of people throughout the world. Our reputation for struggle is what led the Florida state leadership of the NAACP to call on our party to provide leadership in a months-long campaign in Pensacola, a North Florida backwater, after the 1974 police murder of young Wendell Blackwell. Our years based in Gainesville in the early 70s were important, formative years for our party. It was during this time that, under the leadership of Couture Carey, we began our work with the Zimbabwe African National Union, the ruling party now in power in Zimbabwe. From Gainesville, we organized the first ZANU support committee in the United States. We toured ZANU members throughout the U.S. and played a major role in assisting the organization in raising funds for the sustenance of the organization and their organizers. We actually put staff in ZANU's United Nations office in New York. Our party came under political assault in many ways in Gainesville. Couture Carey was an elementary school teacher in the county. FBI harassment and other counterinsurgent activities resulted in her losing her teacher's job. In addition to the other work we did in defense of Couture Carey, we ran her for the school board with a progressive education program. While we had no expectations to win the elections in this politically backward county that was under the economic and political thumb of the University of Florida, we did use the campaign to hold off some of the attacks on Couture, to expose a history of sexual extortion of African women teachers, and to raise up the possibility of better education for the masses of our people. Shortly after the initiation of our Zimbabwe work that began in Gainesville, Florida, our party began assisting the Pan-African Congress of Azania, at the time engaged in a struggle against the apartheid state in South Africa. For many years, PAC members had an ubiquitous presence at party-held events throughout the U.S. We were regular organizers of PAC support actions and spoke in its behalf at the United Nations on more than one occasion. It was our party that printed most of PAC's propaganda in the U.S. and gave the organization material support in the face of the wealthier African National Congress that was supported by the international European left because it was a favored, authentic sixth beneficiary of the Soviet Union. Our party participated in the various debates within the PAC, opposing the negotiated settlement that led to the dismantlement of apartheid as the form of the capitalist state in South Africa. We met with several of the PAC leaders when they were in the US to participate in UN-related affairs, and even recruited a PAC member in the party who appeared to understand the arguments we were making with the PAC about joining the African Socialist International and its need to become a class-conscious political party under the leadership and serving the interests of the African working class and poor peasantry. Obviously, these were struggles we did not win. The fact is that after Zimbabwean independence in 1980 and the capitulation of the apartheid state in South Africa in 1994, most of the militants based in the US from both territories returned to their respective birthlands, ending our relationship for many years to come. The Pan-Africanism of both organizations appeared to have been convenient ideological adaptations used to win African support for their efforts in the struggle to evict the white minority regimes from power. With this accomplishment, they both focused primarily on exercising or winning power within the parliamentary system left in place by the colonial powers they replaced. While still holding on to so-called Pan-Africanism, by the late 1980s, ZANU officially abandoned its designation as Marxist and left behind all pretense of being a socialist organization presiding over a socialist state. In 1976, our party worked with the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and an assortment of African and North American activists to build a July 4th mobilization in Philadelphia termed a bicentennial without colonies. This was to take advantage of the hoopla initiated by the US bourgeoisie to build patriotic fervor among the North American population on the bicentennial anniversary of the bourgeois American Revolution. We saw this as an excellent opportunity to win support for the US-based African struggle against colonialism and mobilized our members and supporters from the US to participate. We also used this anti-colonial momentum to identify many North Americans who had indicated friendship with our party over the years and to win them to an organizational relationship. I want to mention here that in this work with the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, the so-called bicentennial without colonies, we went in there because it gave us an opportunity to reintroduce the colonial question in terms of conditions of African people in this country. Thousands of people came to that mobilization. It is worth noting that the biggest opponent that we had in these meetings trying to define what this mobilization would be about and defending the issue of African people being colonized in this country, the greatest opponent we had was from the remnants of the Black Panther Party. And that is because Huey P. Newton had come up with this theory called intercommunalism that was based on the assumption that imperialism, having developed the way it had transformed all the countries in the world to a part of a single international community, liquidating the existence of nations as such. And like I said, the fundamental struggle that we had in these meetings were with members of the Black Panther Party who, as I said earlier on, were really ambiguous about, at one point, about the African liberation struggle as such, and by now had really abandoned that as a goal, and somehow was tied to this concept of intercommunalism that liquidated the existence of nations altogether. In September, after the July 1976 mobilization the bicentennial without colonies, we pulled the North Americans who we worked with together in St. Petersburg, Florida, and launched the African People's Solidarity Committee, an organization of North Americans, or so-called white people, who work directly under the leadership of our party in the struggle against our colonial oppression as we defined it. Although for years the APSC was met with a barrage of criticism, most of which was done surreptitiously, sometimes in the form of slanderous whisper campaigns from North American leftists and black nationalists, history has proved us correct in building this arm of our party. And I cannot overstate the intensity and the significance of the attack on the party's decision to create the African People's Solidarity Committee. From the white leftists, there were a number of ways, like white feminists in particular define APSC as white lesbians working under black men's leadership, or something to that effect. And that was, at that time, when the bourgeois feminist movement, was so significant, that was, another sophisticated way of making them nigger lovers of sorts, but also an offense, an attack on white bourgeois feminism and lesbianism. So here are lesbianism who've deserted the cause of women, white women and lesbians, and now working under black male leadership. So that was a form of slander from one sector of the left. And I used to joke with some of the comrades, the male comrades in APSC, about how they dealt with being lesbians under our leadership. And then there were others who attacked it because they said, these are white leftists, so-called communists, who said that it wouldn't work because it meant white people working against their own interests. As though it's in the interest. This is coming from communists, so-called communists. It's in the interest of white people to be united with imperialism against the liberation of Africans and other people around the world. I thought that was extraordinary and revealing. And then the African nationalists, some of whom would meet with me. One group, for example, said, well, we thought about doing it, but I'm glad that y'all are doing it. We ain't gonna touch it. And others who had these secret relationships, private relationships, with North American forces like Prairie Fire Organizing Committee out in California, May 19, that version of Prairie Fire that was on the East Coast. And secret relationships that were organized around, really insidious and not nice things. You know what I mean? That they're based in terms of the basis of the relationship was not even political in most instances. For example, I remember when we sent Penny Hess and some other comrades into New York to help build for an event that was being organized by these forces, these solidarity forces, these North Americans, where I was coming to speak. And so when they were laying out the task for everybody, what was going to do, one of them, one of the groups told Comrade Penny that, well, the brothers expect for us, we're the ones who bring the reefer. This is what the brothers expect of them, for them to produce the reefer. And I'm not going to tell you all the things that the brothers expect them to produce. And not only there, but, like in California, I mean, it was rife with, this kind of politic. And so on the one hand, they would have these kinds of relationships and then on the other hand, they would put these insidious slander campaigns, like against the party, that could not be justified. There's a comrade who's dead now, and when we were building the first tribunal, world tribunal for reparations for African people, and among one of the really unfortunate comments that this comrade made was that they was opposed to us dealing with this reparations tribunal because the white people, meaning APSC, would get all the money that they were talking about from reparations. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that, that was happening when and what happened for many, many years later. Penny Hess got trapped on an elevator in New York City by, an African nationalist who had been subjected to Attica. He was in Attica when Rockefeller ordered all those people murdered. And, threatened Penny and called her a racist. She was a racist in reverse, I guess. Somebody was talking about that, right? Because of her stance because her position around racism versus colonialism. And she was articulating, that the struggle was against colonialism. And this comrade, in the meeting with the white folk, and then after the meeting on the elevator going down, this African, actually literally threatened her for being a racist because of her stance around this question. So my point here simply is that there was a lot of slander, a lot of stuff that came our direction because of the relationship with the Solidarity movement. It was a real need, and continues to be, for a sector of people who sometimes call themselves revolutionaries and associated with the movement to protect imperialism. And they do it in 1,000 different ways when they get in front of or impact or try to impact on the revolutionary trajectory that we've organized that will raise up the African working class to its full stature, to reclaim our history, reclaim our dignity, and to achieve our national consolidation. And for them, I don't know what it means. I know that one problem that we always have, which is what makes theory so significant, is that those who don't have theory, who don't have the long view, you got to be able to have the long view. Somebody asked, why some of the people who were involved in the 1960s, who were like comets, brilliant lights flashing across the sky, so important, so significant for the moment, but it was just for the moment. And that they left us nothing really that we can work with. But they didn't have the long view. They didn't have theory that could project beyond where they were located at the time. And if you don't have the long view, if you don't have theory, you can't develop a quality strategy for making revolution. If you don't have a strategy, then everything that you do becomes your strategy. That's why a lot of people ended up, the only thing they could do is when Obama runs and gets elected, then that's the question. Organize everything around Obama because they can't see further ahead than Obama. All they can see is this reality that's imposed on us by imperialism. We have defined imperialism. We have defined the rise of imperialism. We have been able to explain why it came into existence, what it's going to take it out of existence, and it's not going to be the election of a Negro president, whether in the United States or Zimbabwe. It's not going to do it. So we're saying that in terms of APSC, I do not say this simply because of the APSC comrades. Many of the APSC comrades have proven themselves strong African internationalists, opening up another heretofore unavailable black power front within the North American community, something that is valuable unto itself, but also because it was another means of challenging the empty race nationalism that inadvertently contributed to the overall weakness of our struggle against U.S. colonialism and imperialism in general. The creation of APSC helped us to end the counterinsurgent isolation imposed on our movement by the U.S. secret political police. It gave us an avenue through which we could break through the information quarantine, blocking the ability of our movement to engage in political struggle outside our colonized community. The existence of APSC has forever changed the limitations North Americans and Europeans have imposed on how genuine solidarity should be defined. Now it is not they, but we who define solidarity with our struggle for liberation. I'm telling you, I can't begin to tell you how important that has been. And sometimes I tell people in the APSC that you don't understand your own significance or the significance of the existence of APSC. And people who are in this room need to understand that when we're talking about in the 1970s and 1980s and 1990s, much of the 1990s, where the white forces defined what solidarity was, what it meant to be supporting our movement, notwithstanding what we might think is important. They're the ones who defined it. And in so doing, they cowed down many so-called revolutionary forces who were too intimidated, couldn't make demands on them, although what they were supposed to do is being in solidarity with our movement. Here's somebody who claims they're in solidarity with the African liberation movement, and then they say, but this is what you got to do. They're imposing upon us the conditions. That's not solidarity, you know? And so we had to redefine, we took it on. The existence, the physical, practical, objective existence of APSC in the world today means that they can't hide behind that anymore. They can't tell us what white people can do, won't do, etc. We know better because of the relationship that we have. It's created a whole new situation, a whole new political dynamism that I'm hoping that all of us, you know, can understand and respect. So we say that it is also true that nearly all the value extracted from our colonial communities throughout the world is in some white community or another. APSC has assumed the responsibility to do concrete reparations work, achieving its own capacity as an organization of whites to contribute to our just reparations demand, and also winning other North Americans and Europeans to contribute to reparations with material support for our liberation struggle. That's different from charity. You ever notice how even in the city that you live in, the newspaper that is so willing to slam the African Revolution or not even mention the African Revolution, slam the African people in general, they always got this, what do you call it, this feature, human interest feature. They never, on the front page of every city we serve, they show the white world giving some kind of beneficent, some kind of wonderful charity to black people. They love that kind of stuff. They like Africans as being, charity recipients. They love, what's his name, Bono or some person, is that what they call him, Bono? They should be calling him Running Bono, trying to escape Bono, ducking bricks Bono, underground Bono as a consequence of what he means. You understand? And they love that kind of stuff. They would define this woman, who is this anorexic woman who goes into Africa and then kidnaps our children, Jolie, and claims that somehow she's helping African people. And what about the ones who were in Haiti? Had a whole church kidnapping scores of Africans. They helping us by taking our children and what have you. They love the figure of Africans as charities. We're not charities. And we have to reject that definition because the reality is here we are. I can't stand it myself. I know you must be upset about it too because you must feel the way I feel about this, being people who brought civilization to the damn planet at a time, created magnificent civilization at a time before Europeans even mastered fire. And somehow we are the charity cases of the world. Somehow the places where they're getting all the diamonds, all the chromium, all the coltan, all of the bauxite, all the resources that they're coming, somehow these places are the poor people of the world. So I find it problematic. But so we say the work of the party has resulted in APSC members having to confront police repression on a number of campaigns from New York City to Oakland, California, to St. Petersburg, Florida. This comrade is not here. Now, I like to tell the story of Raya Fogarty, who, when I took over presidency of NPDOM in Oakland, California, and when I was its president, Raya was the secretary of that branch, and where we had more than 100 members of NPDOM right there in the city of Oakland, right? But Raya was working in New York City. Same time, I think Comrade Penny and some other folk were there. And she was late to a meeting. And I love telling the story. The reason Raya was late to the meeting because she was on her way to the meeting and she saw the cops, the police, the pigs who were beating up on a Puerto Rican in the streets. And Raya jumped on the police, you know, and they had a tussle out there. That's APSC, that's the party, that's the Uhuru, that's African internationalism, that's who we are. Somebody say that's the way we roll. You understand? So APSC has also been custodian of assorted party-owned institutions for a number of years. And its members have experienced arrest, kidnapping, and various forms of repression as arms of our party. Today, many of those who attacked us in the past for the relationship with APSC, a relationship that is principled and above board, have been forced to abandon previously held rigid racial views that disallowed the development of non-African allies. The party-led campaign to free Desi Woods became the signature campaign of the U.S. front of the African liberation movement of the 1970s. Not only did this campaign help to resurrect and reunify a nearly dormant movement within the U.S., but it also mobilized Africans and democratic forces throughout Europe and a massive display of solidarity with the struggle against U.S. domestic colonialism. The story of Desi Woods' campaign is told with some elements of accuracy in a 2010 book edited by Dan Berger entitled The Hidden 1970s Histories of Radicalism. The title of the book itself is itself a statement of the times, when revolutionary activism was the exception in the wake of the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s that was the engine driving most progressive struggles within the United States. Briefly, Desi Woods was an African woman associated with the Nation of Islam who killed a white man, Ronnie Horn, with his own gun after Horn attempted to rape her and her friend Cheryl Todd at gunpoint. In a struggle for their lives, Woods successfully wrestled the gun away from Horn and shot him. In the face of a weakened African liberation movement, the case was initially jumped on by an assortment of pseudo-communists who, inebriated with their sense of self-importance and in their attempts to build themselves, were fast demoralizing Africans attracted to Woods' defense with esoteric Marxist phrase-mongering in the campaign meetings. Our party was so successful in turning the struggle around in the campaign meetings and advancing the fight against colonial terror represented by the case of Desi Woods that one of the self-defined African Marxists exclaimed in exasperation that someone white had to be involved in a major campaign event, even if it's Rockefeller. The campaign to free Desi Woods became the organizational and political model for how such work should be done. A passage in the Berger book partially describes the impact of the Desi Woods campaign as led by the party-created and led National Committee to Defend Desi Woods. Quote, Demisha Black Earth, who, by the way, was 19 years old at the time, chairwoman of the NCDDW, traveled through Europe, speaking about Woods' case and the systematic human rights violations of black people in the United States. Black Earth's tour garnered increased international attention. Every July 4th until her release, protests demanding Woods' freedom were held throughout the United States and Europe, with thousands of people marching, holding aloft drawings of Desi. See, said Black Earth traveled throughout Europe speaking about Woods' case and the systematic human rights violation of black people in the United States. That's what they were talking about And that's critical in terms of helping everybody in the whole world understand what our struggle and our movement was about. The African People's Socialist Party defined the struggle to free Desi Woods as one directed against colonial violence. This went against the grain. At the time, the bourgeois feminist movement fought to define Woods' campaign as one supporting the right of women to self-defense. This is where the bourgeois feminists were coming from. The bourgeois feminists played a big role in the struggle to free Joanne Little. Just a few months earlier, another African woman who had killed a white rapist jailer in North Carolina. Can I see the hands of people who heard about Joanne Little? Okay, most people have not. And she was a young woman in prison, in jail in North Carolina. And one day, when people came to her cell, they find the white sheriff dead with his pants around his ankle, ejaculation all over the place, and an ice pick, maybe being the only thing you wrecked on him. But anyway, however, and so when Joanne Little killed this guy, and she got away, she escaped, and then she was finally captured. They were talking about, defending Joanne Little, because a woman has a right to self-defense. But that wasn't a woman's right to self-defense that was under assault in that jail, because rape of African women by white men has been a tactic of colonial terror against our folks forever. Like, you can't say castration of black men, it wouldn't be, defend the right of a man to maintain his penis. The castration was something that was done as a form of colonial terror directed at African people. And that's the same thing that happened with Joanne Little and Desi Woods. And we're not going to let somebody take these cases and then build their own movement, their own interests around these cases, and then leaving us in the same shape we were in when the struggle started. So that wasn't going to happen. However, we were determined that the case of Desi Woods would be properly defined as part and parcel of the historical struggle of African people against colonialism. We knew that the struggle to free Desi Woods must advance the total struggle of our people for self-determination, something much of the white movement fought against. The anti-colonial definition of Desi Woods' work was especially important during this period, when the party was determined to rebuild the anti-colonial movement after this devastating military defeat by the U.S. government that received ideological support from North American leftist opportunism. Created and led by our party, the National Committee to Free Desi Woods invited and won participation of thousands of people around the world in the campaign, many of them as members of the committee. The Free Desi Woods campaign impacted on the white bourgeois feminist movement, helping honest forces to begin a process of class suicide by abandoning the self-serving interests of the white rights bourgeois feminists seeking success at the expense of African people and joining the struggle to free Desi and defeat the colonial domination of African people. Several of those forces are working with the movement under the party's leadership today. Some of them are in this room from that struggle. It was precisely because of our correct line around the defense of Desi Woods that remnants of the black liberation movement were able to become reinvigorated through uniting with the campaign. Through the Desi Woods, the Free Desi campaign, the party was able to organize national mobilizations that contributed to the revitalization of the entire struggle against colonialism. Through the Desi Woods campaign, we led the first significant African-led national mobilizations against U.S. domestic colonialism since the defeat of the black liberation struggle of the 1960s. These mobilizations, which gained national and international media attention, occurred in Atlanta, the Georgia state capital, in Hawkinsville, the site of Desi's trial, and in Plains, Georgia, hometown of then U.S. President James Earl Carter. Virtually all elements of the U.S.-based African anti-colonial movement participated, if initially somewhat reluctantly. For the first time in years, the terms have been set for principled participation by various North American left organizations to demonstrate solidarity with our aspirations for total independence from U.S. domestic colonialism. Revolutionary Puerto Rican and Mexican nationals themselves, representing struggles against U.S. colonialism, also expressed practical solidarity with these mobilizations and with the struggle for our national liberation. And this is really, really important. It's a really important point. You know, I know during time we talk about the history of the party, we go through the Desi Woods case, but it happened in a particular context. I think it's really important for us to understand. It helped to rebuild the movement in this country. When we did Desi Woods work, we had organizers in some of the most dangerous areas in the state of Georgia, South Georgia, where we had organized. We went into Hawkinsville. When we went into Hawkinsville, Georgia, in Hawkinsville, Georgia, when the trial of Desi Woods happened, they still had something that approximated convict leasing. There were white people in Hawkinsville, Georgia, that had their own jails. Do you understand what I'm saying? They had their own jails that they locked African people up in. When we went into Hawkinsville, Georgia, the highway patrol had the highway blocked off, and every car that came in there to try to intimidate us, to keep us out of Hawkinsville to defend Desi Woods, every car that came into Hawkinsville had to go through a police checkpoint, had to actually stop and go. And then when we went into Hawkinsville and began to organize in there, the police had attempted to terrorize. We had sisters or teachers who brought their children, their students, to participate in demonstrations demanding the freedom of Desi Woods. And we had the police attempting to terrorize them out of support. We had a situation where, you know, we went into a housing project in Hawkinsville, Georgia. This was bold and audacious during that time, and put on the Isley Brothers Fight the Power to draw the African population out who've been so accustomed to being intimidated by white terror. And then I stood in the middle of that housing project and made one of the most inflammatory state presentations I could think of. The most anti-white, the most this and that, to try to help these people understand, our people, you don't have to be intimidated by this stuff right here. It was just an incredible movement. The Desi Woods campaign was a really powerful campaign that was led by our party. And it pulled together forces who had not been together in any kind of actions. They were having meetings in New York. They were having discussions in New York, and a lot of people come out to them just like they do in some places today. You know the discussions I'm talking about, but they were not organizing against anything. The case of Joanne Little, do you know who the former leadership of the case of Joanne Little was? It was the Black Panther Party. Larry Little, who was running the Black Panther Party in North Carolina. He was the former leader of that movement. But they weren't talking about struggling against colonialism. They weren't talking about building a movement to re-engage imperialism in a struggle against the oppression and colonization of our people. The African People's Socialist Party did that. We did it with Desi's work, and we mobilized folk in a way that they had not been mobilized for years. That's the role that we played. We took people into Plains, Georgia. James Earl Carter was the president then. They never had no damn demonstration of black people in Plains, Georgia. When we rolled into Plains, Georgia, you had all these tourists from all around the world coming to this peanut plantation to where James Carter, what's his name? James Earl Carter? Is that his name? James Earl Carter. You know, who had a peanut plantation that required African near slave labor to make them rich. But we put Africans and Puerto Ricans and Mexicans on the ground and white solidarity forces on the ground with demonstrations that shocked those tourists. You could have seen how the flash cameras and everything were going off. It was a whole serious movement. And then, anyway, we won't even go there. But it was really important. And I want people to understand the historical context that this thing happened in. The apparent unity of the U.S. front of the African liberation movement that was spurred by the Desi Woods campaign had a direct impact on the decision of the party to build the African National Prison Organization, ANPO. We initiated ANPO after discussions with leaders within the pro-independence movement with the intent of building on that unity that was expressed during the Desi Woods campaign. Our expressed intent was to take on the prison question as a joint project, since our whole movement was concerned about this question especially the issue of political prisoners who had fallen during the defeat of our revolution in the 1960s. We saw ANPO as a vehicle through which the anti-colonial tendency of our movement might unite around practical work through collective leadership. In this way, we felt we could establish working unity, so our line differences, that is the difference in political lines that we had, could be struggled around and resolved through practice instead of debates around abstract questions. The founding conference of ANPO was convened in Louisville, Kentucky, Nate, in 1979. That's where his daddy from. Attendance was high and comprised of mostly enthusiastic Africans who were relieved to see our movement functioning at such a high level of proficiency and resuming control and leadership of our own struggle for national liberation. Unfortunately, the leaders of the attending organization were enmeshed in political line differences with the movement of the African working class led by our party. Their differences revolved essentially around whether the prison question would be targeted in the context of an anti-colonial struggle or whether it would be taken on as a single issue within the status quo of imperialism. For example, one argument put forward at the conference was that ANPO should be run from prisoners behind bars. So, there are all kinds of contradictions there, but suggesting that the prison question was separate from the total colonial reality and could be resolved independently. We recognize that these forces were petty bourgeois, often adventuristic forces, who at the time were strongly supported by the radical oppressor nation left, white left, that rose up after the U.S. defeat of our movement of the 1960s, and who substituted white and male supremacy as the enemy rather than U.S. and European colonialism. These forces refused to acknowledge that the terrorized masses of African people were under the siege of the U.S. counterinsurgency being waged against the entire African working class in an attempt to keep it from rising up again. This was a critical issue of this period that our party waged serious struggle for many years within the pro-independence movement, publishing a book based on articles that had appeared in the Burning Spear newspaper. Uhuru. Would you mind standing up for a moment, please? As quickly as you can. Yeah, let's see if we can get a rush of blood and oxygen to the brain and what have you. Yeah, well, might as well stretch a little bit, you know? Yeah, good. I know it's tiring, and you know, what happens is you sit down long enough and the blood rushes to your... And that can be problematic. Have a bloody booty. Anyway, all right, comrades, thank you so much. The book was Black Power Since the 60s, the struggle against opportunism within the U.S. front of the Black Liberation Movement in 1991. I want to really have that book republished. It's one of the most important pieces that we did. In the introduction to this book, I wrote, quote, "For us in the African People's Socialist Party, this is not just an abstract discussion to demonstrate our paranoia concerning the North American colonial state or to prove that we are knowledgeable about counterinsurgency. We initiated this discussion, this struggle against opportunism, as part of a process to resolve the outstanding problems of the revolution," unquote. Nevertheless, ANPO did succeed in raising the issue of prison as a tool of colonial control of our people and created an organization that, although short-lived, organized Africans in and outside the prison into a dynamic organized resistance. 1979 is also the year that our party was thrust into the international limelight. It was in January, some 20 years after the U.S. overthrow of the elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh, that the people of Iran took possession of their sovereignty by overthrowing the Shah that maintained Iran as a U.S. military forward operating base in the Persian Gulf. The success of the Iranian Revolution and the capture by the Iranian people of the U.S. Embassy that functioned as a nest of spies in Iran, inflamed the patriotic passions of the U.S. North American population, threatening the possibility of direct U.S. military intervention. Within the U.S., North Americans began attacking all Middle Easterners, Arabs as well as Iranians. North American students were holding rallies on university campuses that were punctuated with cries of "Sand niggers, go home," and "Send the Klan to Iran." Our party had already developed a working political relationship with Iranian exiles and students, particularly in Gainesville, Florida. We participated regularly in the demonstrations they held demanding the ouster of the U.S.-imposed Shah. The North American students on the campus of the elite University of Florida in Gainesville, where we had a significant presence, were holding some of the rabidly anti-Iranian and white nationalist demonstrations. It was in the face of this knee-jerk clamor in the government and on the streets and campuses throughout the U.S. that we organized a mass mobilization in defense of the Iranian people in Gainesville that was attacked and disrupted by hundreds of flag-waving, America-chanting white people. However, they were mistaken if they thought frothing at the mouth patriotic white mobs could silence this party. On the following week, to the dismay of the police department and the Negro ministers of the local churches who advised the African community not to join us, we marched again behind the red, black, and green. This time, because our first demonstration and its disruption were reported all over the world, the Gainesville Police Department came out in full force to escort our march. When we were greeted by thousands of beer-drinking, flag-waving, America-chanting whites, some of which were members of motorcycle gangs, we marched right into the mob and faced them down with chants of "Africa, Africa, Africa." This is 1979. I took the platform in the middle of the City Hall Plaza and announced to the crowd, "The sand niggers are here." Then, to their own amazement, the crowd was stilled while I read a statement from the then Prime Minister of Iran. I think his name was Bani Saad at the time. After this, we began to march away. The police informed us that they were supposed to accompany us only as far as the plaza. Using an explicit expletive, I told the police to leave and led the African marchers away from the City Hall Plaza with mobs of whites following, chanting and waving their American flags. The rabid white mob attempted to threaten us only until we reached the African community. At this point, Africans rushed out of their homes and the bars and rushed forward yelling, "You're not in America now." This display of unity and support for our movement proved to be dissuasive enough to send the whites scurrying back to the politically rancid America with which they were so conditionally enamored. Our party gave life and definition to the movement for reparations for African people and colonized peoples worldwide. While we did not initiate the contemporary demand for reparations, we definitely made reparations a mass issue with the goal early on to make reparations a household word. Prior to the involvement of our party, the issue of reparations essentially involved efforts to win some kind of legislative or judicial recognition in U.S. courts or by the state or federal government. There was no real mass movement. We recognized that reparations had to become the property of the masses if it was to be a significant political question. In 1982, we held the World Tribunal on Reparations for African People in the U.S. in Brooklyn, New York. The tribunal found that the U.S. owed African people in the U.S. $4.1 trillion for stolen labor alone, the first empirical quantification of the value of capitalized African labor. Immediately after the conclusion of this historical event, we organized the African National Reparations Organization, ANRO, whose sole objective was to win the reparations demand in the consciousness of African people. Shortly after the World Tribunal, I toured Europe with the reparations message. going first to London and Ireland, and then to France and Germany, meeting with hundreds of Africans in different settings and winning explicit support from the Irish Republican Socialist Party, which at the time was locked in a life and death anti-colonial struggle with colonial England. This is important. This is for the first time we've taken our struggle out, because up until now what had happened is the view of people around the world of our struggle was something that they got from white leftists, from communists, the Communist Party or something like that. You go to England, you go to someplace in the world, and they tell you what you were fighting for. They tell you what the struggle was about based on what they got from white folk who came from this country. Because we didn't have the mobility, we didn't have the ability. Now, movement had been crushed. Now, it's we who are traveling the world, and then we got the Irish Republican Socialist Party. You know, I went to Ireland, Belfast. It's quite an experience, 1983, where the British were still openly dominating Ireland, where I saw for the first time white people really being oppressed, where on almost every corner there were literally little fortresses that the British had stuck up all around Ireland. And when I got there, and after we met, on the day I left, first of all, when I was going to immigration, before I handed my passport to the immigration authority, they asked me, I used to go by the name Joe Waller. They asked me, they said, well, I hope you enjoyed your trip, Mr. Waller. I haven't even given my passport. They say this. And the next day, the headquarters of the Irish Republican Socialist Party was torched. They burned it down to the ground. So these were serious errors, but we are now in the mix. We are defining our own struggle. We are the ones who are articulating the world, you know, from the perspective of our folk and our people. And there were other trips to Europe, especially to England, to promote the reparations campaign. And, you know, Louise, and maybe some of you know of Babu, who was, you know, in the government of Tanzania when they achieved independence, and who lived in London for a while. I mean, he you know, contacted me to tell me about this reparations thing. It was we who took reparations to England and to France, and Beanie Brown out of Birmingham claims that he was nearly arrested in Birmingham for taking out the literature that we had been putting out about reparations to African people. So, I mean, this is a campaign that we built, and we built it not just in those places, because on the first trip I made to England, it was an international book fair, international African and radical book fair, black and radical book fair. And there were people from all over the world who were there. And part of what my whole mission was taking the reparations demand and the outcome of the reparations tribunal that we had held in Brooklyn, New York, and getting it out to all those forces. We did that. So that's how reparations got to England, directly as a consequence of our party and to much of Europe. We say that following the first tribunal in 1982, we published the book, Reparations Now, the abbreviated report from the International Tribunal on Reparations for Black People in the U.S. A few years later, African Socialist International Secretary General Louise Kinshasa was recruited to the party after he found and bought the book in a Paris bookstore. Right? Our party's work to raise the question of reparations to African people laid the foundation for the popularity of reparations movement throughout the African world. It was a forerunner and catalyst for the historic 2001 UN-sponsored Durban, South African Conference on Racism, Xenophobia, and Other Intolerances that resulted in slavery and colonialism being described a crime against humanity, and reparations a legitimate response. The party's participation in the reparations work also expanded the issue beyond the question of slavery. Slavery was the main issue for which reparations compensation was being demanded by most others prior to our involvement. We exposed the fact that the rate of exploitation of Africans has been greater since slavery. Moreover, we determined that reparations are due to Africans for colonialism and neo-colonialism, and for the extent differences in the conditions of existence between Africans and Europeans. Our view of the reparations issues has always been informed by our understanding of parasitism or primitive accumulation as the essence of capitalism that was born of our enslavement and colonization. We have always understood that almost all the resources of Europe and North America owe their existence to the forcible expropriation of value from Africa, Africans, and others upon whom Europe depends for sustenance and vitality.